Thank you for joining us on At Issue. I'm H. Wayne Wilson, and for the next half hour, we're going to be talking about development issues, about crime issues, about budgetary issues, all concerning the city of Peoria. And of course, that affects many people who live outside the city of Peoria because, after all, it is the core city of this area. And to have the discussion, the two leaders of the city of Peoria. First, let me introduce to you the city manager, Patrick Urich. Patrick, welcome to the program. Thank you for being with us.
H, thank you for having us.
And the mayor of the city of Peoria is Jim Ardis. Jim, thank you for being here.
Thanks, H.
Let's start with the budget. The City Council recently approved some changes in health insurance. Could you explain that and the savings and what's left and how you might make up that deficit?
Sure. Our budget deficit, when we presented a preliminary outlook of the budget in May, we estimated that the operating budget deficit would be about $3 million. We went through with our Labor and Management Committee. They meet and look at the design of our health plan. And they made some changes to the health plan. We went out on the street, looked at opening up through competition to other health networks. So now our employees will have the opportunity to utilize both OSF and Unity Point Methodist Health Network and their network of doctors for their health coverage. And that allowed us to generate some significant savings in the plan. In addition, we made some design changes to the plan. We have two types of plans. We have a high deductible plan and a low deductible plan. The low deductible plan being more costly for the city to manage and administer. We made changes to that. Increasing the out-of-pockets, increasing some of the deductible levels. And by doing all of that, we estimate that we're going to be able to save nearly $1.2 million off of that $3 million budget deficit that we're looking at. That will translate into savings into 2015 as well. So it has a carrying cost or a savings that'll go forward. So it's a positive step towards closing the budget deficit.
And that leaves about $1.8 million yet to be resolved in terms of the projected deficit for the upcoming fiscal year. You have suggested, Mayor, that program modifications could be what the City Council looks to. What are you talking about when you say program modifications?
Well, H, when we look at our overall budget, 80% roughly of our budget is tied up in people and their benefits and their pension and their health care costs, which the manager has already addressed. So we don't have this big pocket of discretionary money to just say, well, let's just pull that out of this pocket of money over here. Most of it's tied into some program or another within the city. So we have, over the last six or 7 years, reduced our workforce by right around 20%, significantly. So our ability to just say we're going to just go and cut more bodies out of a specific department, it's not impossible, but we've gone through that exercise over several years. So that really kind of narrows our options down to looking at specific areas that we have money programmed into, or trying to identify a new revenue stream, which is very difficult to do anytime, but when you're still in a recession, which I think we still are, it's extremely difficult for the council to have to go out to the people that live in Peoria and say, we need a new revenue stream. So that's, and the manager hasn't presented a budget to us, but since he's been here, he always presents us with about a balanced budget. But my length of time here would indicate to me that those are the areas that we'll have to look at first in closing that number down.
You want to share any thoughts?
Well, I think that to put it succinctly, as the mayor mentioned, 80% of the budget is really driven by our employment costs. It costs a lot to employ people and to pay for their benefits, and those costs have been increasing faster than the rate of inflation, while our revenues have been growing at inflationary levels. They've really just kind of kept pace with inflation, and so that's where the budget deficit comes from. So we have to look at how we can realign the programs and the services that we're delivering. And it may mean, as the mayor is mentioning, that some areas we say we're not going to be in this program any longer, or we're going to have to do it differently and more cost effectively. Well, when you look at it now, I mean, we're talking $1.8 million on the operating budget side is roughly about 1% or 1.5%. So I feel confident that as we put together this budget, we'll be able to close that, present a balanced budget to the mayor and the council that they can take up and move forward with, and hopefully we'll have that wrapped up in mid-November.
And of course, the state legislature affects you, and there is a proposal, a bill that has been introduced, now whether it has any traction or not is a question, to eliminate the state sales tax on fuel. The city gets 1% of that tax. Have you had a chance to look at how that might impact you?
The revenues that we receive from motor fuel taxes and from the sales taxes that are on fuel are an important part of our revenue base. There's no question about it, but they've been declining. And people with their vehicles are driving less miles. Vehicle mileage is getting better, so that you're getting cars that have better gas mileage. So we're seeing that puts a lot of stress right now on how we fund infrastructure. It would be wonderful to be able to say that we were going to reduce the revenue streams that are coming in from gas taxes and the sales taxes on fuel. My concern is what backfills that, because we still have a significant backlog of infrastructure needs from roads and bridges that are paid for by those taxes, and whether or not you can grow your way out of that by making that kind of tax cut, I don't know if that can actually happen.
Let's move to development issues. A couple of weeks ago, we sat through a presentation at the City Council meeting with Ian Lockwood, who presented what he calls complete streets. And he had, it was a very broad perspective. There were a lot of issues, eliminating curbs, having whether or not to have roundabouts, whether or not to convert one-way streets to two-way streets, things of that nature. With the tight budget that the two of you have already talked about, how might complete streets, as you look at renovating streets in the future, how might that play a role?
Well, it's from a timing standpoint, I think it's a good time for Peoria to be having that discussion, just because we are in a period of time here where we really are focused more on addressing some of our current infrastructure needs. So a lot of our current infrastructure needs, when the manager brought us back the recommendation to separate what we're paying for solid waste removal, that allowed us to focus a good portion of our on our budget on our roads and on our infrastructure, instead of peeling that money out of Public Works to pay for the garbage. So we do have a revenue stream that is dedicated to the infrastructure. So with that in mind, there's a lot of the ideology around complete streets that really is, I hate to just narrow it down too far and say it's about traffic calming, but a lot of it is just to understand the importance to your whole community for safety, for commerce, just for the livability of your community, to understand how that infrastructure works. So in many cases, we're lucky here we are downtown and in the warehouse district, we have $30 million that we're using to work on some of those infrastructure needs. But for example, Sheridan Road, a lot of these complete street thoughts can be instituted on an area like Sheridan Road with paint. We don't have to dig up the whole street and move utilities. We can just go to a two-lane road with a bike path and do some bump outs on the corners just to slow traffic down. And it's so much deeper. The reality is the engineering concepts that most cities our size and larger have employed for decades was basically make them wide, make them fast, and move people in and out. And really that whole thought process is really coming back, I won't say to haunt us, because I think it fulfilled what people thought they wanted, but right now, especially with the changing patterns of people and how they're getting from point A to point B, everybody's not just getting in their car to drive anymore. They're using mass transit, they're using buses, they're carpooling. A lot of that's being driven by the price of fuel. But a lot of these things really have an impact on your community and the walkability and livability of your community. So great timing for the discussion.
In the presentation from Mr. Lockwood, he used the phrase silver bullet, and he identified silver bullets as a big project that you expect to have a tangential effect, that if you build this structure, other private developers will come in. I immediately thought of the ballpark. And no offense to the Vanaken family, it's a marvelous facility. But nothing happened around there, with the small exception, there's a restaurant that's going to go in, but nothing's happened. And so I'm looking at the Pier Marquette. Yes, the library's renovated across the way, but what's going to happen to the block immediately across from the Pier Marquette? Mr. Matthews has put a lot of money, the city has put a lot of money into that project. Is there anything going to happen with that Madison Theater that sits there like a sore thumb?
We have, as part of the hotel deal that we worked out, part of the land transfer with moving Big Al's included the acquisition by the city of the surface parking lot that's immediately adjacent to the Madison Theater on Madison, in between Hamilton and Madison, right there. We've talked with the Comfort family, who owns the Madison Theater block, about partnering with the city on issuing a request for proposals to developers to look at renovating the Madison Theater and coupling that with new development on that surface parking lot, so that if we can, and the discussions that we've had with the Comforts have been, if there's an opportunity to build something with enough density on that block that would help to renovate the Madison Theater, that we would look at trying to do that as well and see what we could do from that perspective.
And you're talking renovation, not demolition.
Not demolition. And part of the issue that and the reason that we're saying no demolition is the fact that if you want to have any type of tax increment financing funds or any other type of incentive dollars that you have to have within that historic tax credits along those lines, you cannot do any of that without in a historic building if you demolish that structure. So you can't get any other type of public incentives if you tear down a building that's on the National Register.
I apologize for that. I thought we had a fly-free zone. It's not working. We'll take care of that. My apologies. Let's move to the water company. Every 5 years, the city's allowed to say to the water company, we'd like to explore the possibility of buying it. And the city council in the past has said no after doing some due diligence. You appointed a committee to look at the pros and cons, headed by Bob Manning. They have yet to report back. And in the interim, we learned that the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission, Terry Kolbus and Jim Baumgartner from Focus Forward CI, have all of a sudden looked at promoting the purchase of the water company. What's your role in all of this, and why did Tri-County Regional Planning take the bull by the horns all of a sudden?
I think it's probably only fair to point out that Tri-County Planning did not have a role in the advocacy of trying to influence the council to make that decision. I don't think that there's anything that indicates that the actual Tri-County Planning Commission asked that effort be undertaken. And it might not seem like a big deal, but it is a big deal that I don't have any knowledge that Tri-County participated in going that road.
The commission itself.
The commission itself, okay. So I just don't want to take a broad brush here because that is important. That part of it really doesn't have a bearing on us, obviously. I have some concerns about the way that happened and the potential influence that was going to be used. But really, there's two things that are important here. Number one is the council is going to make that decision, and we've done it before. People always are very willing to give us their opinion on what we should do on that. And so this kind of effort seemed just a little bit heavy-handed. But the council is going to make that decision, and the information that we get from the committee that Bob Manning's chairing is going to be supplemental information to information that the manager is going to bring back to us, and other information that we may get from different entities. I think the important thing to draw, at least that I'm drawing, as it relates to some of the drama that's going on right now, is the important thing is the Focus Forward CI initiative needs to stabilize, and it needs to go forward. This is our regional economic development group that is really going to focus on what this region needs to do to compete globally. And so however they resolve this issue, they need to resolve it so the initiative itself doesn't lose credibility, doesn't lose steam, and really does do what it was intended to do.
Let's talk a little bit about the warehouse district. You alluded to the $30 million in infrastructure repairs, et cetera. Do we have anybody looking seriously at the warehouses? I mean, you put a lot of money into the streets. You want those warehouses to be renovated, used for street level retail, for apartments, et cetera. Any?
We do. We've had several developers, both from the Chicago area and other communities, that have come in and taken a look at different buildings. Some that are working on some offers as we speak, others that are really looking at some of the challenges that many of these buildings pose. When you're talking about this type of renovation, it is a challenge to get a building that may be 10 stories tall renovated without having either your own financial resources and wherewithal to do it, or to be able to leverage additional dollars not only from the tax increment financing district, but through the historic tax credits that may come forward. We've just established the River's Edge redevelopment zone within the area to ensure that many of the historic structures that are there will be eligible for the state historic tax credits, that coupled with the federal historic tax credits will allow someone to, in essence, take 45% of the cost of that eligible cost of renovation and apply that as a tax credit towards the project, which is a significant dollar amount when you start to look at what it's going to take to renovate many of these buildings. There's a lot of infrastructure work. It's almost as expensive as building a new building when you're looking at this, because you've got to put in elevators that are to code. You've got to really renovate those out. We've done some walkthroughs of many of these buildings with the property owners that currently exist.
I'm sorry, do you get the impression that the developers think it's possible?
Oh, I think there's a definite view amongst the developers. And if they didn't think it was possible, we wouldn't be having the number of meetings that we're having with property owners and the developers coming to town that are looking at these properties.
Your sense of progress in the warehouse district?
Well, I think, H, when you consider the overall economy in the last 5-6 years, I think it's doing okay. Would we have liked to seen more happen sooner? Yes, but a lot of this is funding issues. A lot of these people that are going to go in and make huge investments in these buildings needed to see that infrastructure in place before they did it, and that's really what's happening here. So we're satisfied. Really kind of one of the interesting dynamics now that we're seeing are a lot of these warehouses that have been empty and vacant for 10, 20 and longer years that had little or no value. And now that the government has come in and made that investment in the infrastructure, which is what we should do, a lot of these people are all of a sudden really proud of these properties, and the value of their property, at least in their head, is really increased significantly. So what we're going to see in that first 1 or 2 people that come in with projects is they're going to establish kind of what that bar is on what the value of those properties are, because they're going to say, we think that paying this price for the property, acknowledging what we're going to have to put in to the property to bring everything up to code and so on, that's the level we're going to be at. So some of these people that all of a sudden thought that when the city, state, and federal government put $30 million into the area, they hit the lottery. They're going to realize that there is a market value for those properties, and this is about where it is. And we think that's going to happen pretty soon.
Let's turn to crime issues. Several weeks ago, the City Council went into executive session. I, of course, do not know what happened in that executive session, but is it fair to say that the status of Chief Settings Guard was discussed?
It's fair. As I said, coming out of that executive session, my employer, the City Council, had some questions about one of my employees, the police chief, and his performance. We went into closed session and had a conversation about that. It was a very frank discussion. We had some good questions that were raised, some issues and concerns that were aired, and we came out of that closed session, and I think, that have hopefully closed the door on a lot of those discussions. I think that I expressed to the council my support strong support for the police chief and the job that he's doing and the task that he's that he is charged with taking on and performing. So it's I think in many ways it's important that we focus on, as the police side of the city, that we're focusing on what's really important, and that's making our neighborhoods safe, addressing violent crime where it's occurring, and doing what we can to be responsive to the public.
You're his employer.
Yes.
Did you give him some marching orders as to improvements that might be made?
We've had discussions about that. We've had discussions about the circumstances that were being raised by the council, and we'll continue to.
Your support for the police chief?
That hasn't changed, H. I mean, I have 110% confidence in what the chief's doing and the direction that he's taken that department, and the confidence that myself and the citizens of that city, of our city, that he's doing these things to make our community safer.
Let's talk about some programs that might have an impact on crime. You've, of course, been very involved with Don't Shoot, and now the City Council approved, if I recall, $405,000 to establish in a 3 square mile area, primarily on the south end of the city, what's called ShotSpotter. Could you explain ShotSpotter and how it might work in conjunction with Don't Shoot and other crime efforts, anti-crime efforts?
Yeah, ShotSpotter is a technology that utilizes devices that actually will sense gunfire within the area that they're set up in. And it can distinguish between a firecracker, a car backfiring, and a gun. And not just a gun, but different calibers, a small caliber, a large caliber, an automatic weapon. It can detect a direction if it's moving, if they're shooting in a car. But it isolates, triangulates actually where that shot came from, gets the information back to our police department in a minute, and we dispatch to the location. So instead of being in a situation right now where you'll have someone will call into 911 and say there were shots fired in my neighborhood. Well, to them, maybe it was shots fired, maybe it was a car backfiring, maybe it was fireworks. So what happens now when that happens is they'll dispatch officers to that vicinity. And if the officers don't see anything, if there's not a person down, people around them, they're driving through the streets and through the alleys looking to see if they see any evidence of that and so on. So we tie up a tremendous amount of our resources in officers in areas trying to see if there really were shots fired, if there's not something there. So what this technology will do is actually identify it and put us into a location within 40, 50 yards, or 50 feet, I should say. Pretty tight proximity to where it happened. So they'll go there if it happened. If there's shell casings or whatever, it's going to expedite the whole process. So instead of having officers walking around at 2 o'clock in the morning with flashlights looking for shell casings or any other evidence, we're going to go right to the scene. How does this help? Well, instead of having anywhere from 2 to 10 or 12 officers scouring an area looking for what may or may not have happened, they're dispatched to the relative location. It's going to save us a lot of money. It's going to complement their ability to actually, in some cases, get to that location before, if there was a shooting, before the people left.
Let me talk about a positive thing that happened recently to close out the program. All-America City status, I think it's the 4th time in the last 50 years or so. How does that impact the city? I mean, it's nice to be able to put on your signs an All-America City 2013, but what impact does it really have on improving our economy, whatever?
The All-American City is a designation that the National Civic League puts out that recognizes cities that are and the people within the cities that are really working to try and deliver services and provide for their community in innovative and unique ways. And I think what for me, that was the biggest charge out of the momentum behind the All-American Cities effort this year was the fact that it came from our young professionals group, that it was really started at the level where, you know, the 20-somethings and the 30-somethings were out there saying, we are proud of Peoria and we want to promote this city to the nation and say what positive things that we're doing. And that electricity that they brought to the process is something that we need to continue to build upon.
Patrick Urich, City Manager of the City of Peoria, thank you for joining us on At Issue. And Mayor Jim Ardis, as always, thank you so much for joining us. It's always good to get an update on where the city and Central Illinois is headed. And next week, please join us again for At Issue. We're going to be talking about vintage aircraft. And you say, why? Well, it's a dying art, actually. There's an individual from Eureka who has a Warbird, a TBM Avenger torpedo bomber. And we also visit the Galesburg National Stearman Fly-In. Fewer and fewer people are taking an interest. What will the future be? Join us next time on At Issue.